I never see an exit as success criteria. What drives me is always building something. I'm a small company sort of guy, whether it was my own or was something small, you know, with the founding team. I think that was sort of what I was looking for.
Robin and I were working together at Ventures West. I was an entrepreneur in residence there, Robin was a partner. And we were looking at the model and believing that there was a better way to do venture in Canada. So we both left Ventures West and we formed Basecamp Labs. And this was Basecamp Labs was a self-funded entity. And we got involved with Push Life and Chango, and the rest is sort of history.
We met at the early stages. It was early in Push Life and it was early days and the Basecamp partners. And we just respected each other as a group of guys that could help build something.
This is really about finding founders. You think you're going to help in the early stages be successful, and then you're comfortable with all the money you've given him to back away and let him, you know, drive the bus and take it forward.
We could probably both say it at the exact same time. Ray.
Ray is pretty exceptional. He had great vision from early days that hasn't wavered much at all. And as we meet people, new entrepreneurs, new founders, even with great ideas, Ray really set a high bar.
One of the things that I'd mapped through the mid-2000s was just smartphone penetration in developed countries, you know, North America and Europe. You know, the reality of today is that global handset distribution is weighted towards 80% feature phones and 20% smartphones. And so there's sort of a greenfield opportunity right now with emerging countries that just don't have the kind of smartphone penetration we have here. So that's an opportunity that I really keyed in on.
In the early days, the whole company was hinged on a two-way sync functionality. And we had a phone call with one of the carriers early on, and we pitched it as this two-way sync product, and it was better than anything out there, and it would do this and that, and it just was a complete flop. And went back to the drawing board and came back with, this is an iTunes style store for mobile, and that you enable the carrier to finally get into the game of selling content the way iTunes is doing that with their iPhone on your network. And when they got that, we went into that pitch and it was immediate. It flipped the thinking.
We truly leveraged the capabilities and the connectivity on a phone to, you know, immediately pull down song lyrics, biographies, artist pictures, news, concert listings, and really make the platform stand out. Some mistakes are really costly to fix in the long run. So hiring is done through references and people we know. There's always the option of using headhunters, and you do get good people through them, they're just expensive. Most people coming to us are looking for autonomy, control, and the ability to make a difference. And usually those are the kinds of people you want to hire anyway. Our first employee definitely had the right skills, but there were some signs at an interview that he may not really necessarily be the kind of guy that would fit into a company like this. Ignored that intuition and just kind of said, look, the skills look right on paper, so it should be fine. And that was a disaster. We had to let this person go. And I think I'm starting to learn more that intuition is more important than I think people give it credit.
I don't think we went at it as, how do you do this as an investor? I think we went at it more as, how do we build companies again the right way? And that's where Push Life came in. It really was very influential and helped us kind of define the way we got involved very actively in companies.
I don't look at them as my venture investors. I look at them as just guys on a team helping to build something.
We sat in a meeting one day and Ray sort of looked over and said, here are the co-founders for me, you know, Duncan and Robin. That's exactly what we want to feel like every time in the companies we get involved in.
In the next 18 months or so, as we really start moving into emerging countries and geographies that have almost no other electronics, we can allow mobile entertainment to be brought in a really cost-effective manner. It's not saving the world or curing cancer, but it's one of the ways that I think we can address emerging markets and deliver high value at a very low cost.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Entrepreneurship 101. As Carrie said, I am going to do a little promo for next week's experiments. We love testing things on our audiences like you. And that is the Meet the Entrepreneurs event. There will be 4 of them. This is the first, and it's on ICE. IT, communications, and entertainment, as in digital media. There will be no tap dancing involved. Well, I don't think. anyway. This will be a panel discussion. There will be 3 speakers. Ray Reddy, the CEO of Push Life, who you just saw. I'm waiting until they can turn my BrownBerry into a mobile media player. Now that will be something. Second speaker will be Nick Sulsky, the CEO of InGamer Sports. And it says here, InGamer Sports fuses real-time gaming innovation with live sports, mobile accessibility, and social networking, none of which I really understand, and I feel really old to admit that. And the third speaker will be Steve Lamb, the CEO of Nevex, and Nevex Virtual Technologies develops solutions for cloud storage, and that I at least get. Anyway, the format is very simple. Panel discussion, time for Q&A, and then the key thing really is a networking event. And we really want you to be able to meet one another, as well as the speakers and the various Martians who will be hanging around the event. It's a cash bar, since your tuition fees don't permit us to buy you booze, but there will be snacks, which we can pay for, okay? And we really hope you'll stay and just mingle and talk to fellow entrepreneurs. So that's next week. Now, this week, I really am pleased to welcome a colleague of mine at Mars, John Warren. John is a special advisor to Mars and the co-founder of Clear Sky Advisors. Clear Sky Advisors is a renewable energy advisory firm, but John has 17 years of experience in management consulting, research IT, and clean tech. We really use him as a special advisor in the areas of strategy, marketing, and sales. And if you go to the Entrepreneur's Toolkit section, where all those articles and workbooks are, you'll find a lot of John's work posted there. So some of you may have already met him indirectly if you've been using any of those workbooks. Now, John has had considerable prior experience before Mars, obviously at firms like Gartner, that's just a brand name, and 7 years in the software industry, which as a chemist I don't hold against him. John holds a Master of Science in Media and Communication from the London School of Economics, and I never thought you could combine all of those in one sentence. But that's an interesting degree, and he also has a Master of Science in Business and Economics from the Norwegian School of Management. So John is going to be talking to us about technology marketing, and without further ado, over to you, John.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you to Mars for having me back here. I did this lecture last year, and this is one of my favorite topics, so I appreciate having the opportunity to come back and talk about marketing and specifically about technology marketing once more. Welcome, everybody. As Tony said, my name is John Warren, and in addition, I guess he alluded to it in the introduction. He said I was a co-founder of a research and advisory firm. So I'm standing in front of you as an entrepreneur in addition to the role that I fulfill here at Mars. So as an entrepreneur, I have, over the last week, have the benefit of an average of 5 hours sleep per night. So if I'm rambling on a little bit, it's just because I'm living the life of the average entrepreneur, and I'm sure those of you who are familiar with that can sympathize. Anyway, before we get started, I'd like to just understand a little bit about the audience here. So if we just can, by show of hands, say, does anybody here have, as part of their education, marketing? Okay, very good. And does anybody here have, as part of their work experience, some sort of marketing? Excellent. And then finally, who here in the audience are an entrepreneur, have an idea or a product that they're working to commercialize? Great, excellent. So this will be hopefully a very interesting lecture. Oops. So what we have on the menu today is, this is the introductory lecture. So I have the pleasure of sort of defining the scope of the marketing lectures here at Mars, and we're doing it different this year from what we've done previous years. Marketing has been recognized as a key issue for entrepreneurs in Canada. We have very good scientists, we have good and creative people that come up with ideas, but we really suck at marketing here. So what we've done is that we've expanded the coverage of marketing within Entrepreneurship 101. So instead of the 1, 2, or 3 lectures that we used to have in the past, we now, I think we have 6, plus we have a couple of additional lectures, which means that I don't have to squeeze in quite as much as I needed to last year. We can take a little bit more time and make it a little bit more practical. So I'm going to cover some of the initial tools and frameworks that are important in technology marketing. I'm going to try to make it practical and see what that means in terms of application within a startup context. And I'm also going to talk briefly about what you can expect to find in the other marketing lectures that will be coming later in the season here. So the objective for today, to define the key marketing concepts and also introduce you to some of the tools that you have at your disposal in terms of marketing. So looking at the definition, this one is taken from the American Marketing Association. I'm going to give you a few seconds to read it. I don't necessarily want to read it for you. So the things that I think are interesting with this rather wordy definition is the fact that it encompasses a lot of different things. It shows that marketing is complex on many different levels. First of all, it covers a set of key functional processes. And these aren't small processes. These are substantial processes within any kind of organization. The second part of it is that it's a function. So it is an organization, a place within the organizational hierarchy. And the third part of the definition is that it defines the context, namely that it benefits the organization and its stakeholders. So we're going to touch upon all of those different aspects with regards to marketing. One of the sort of key concepts within marketing is the marketing mix. This sort of defines the scope of what marketing is about. I like to start with that. It's also have an acronym as the 4 Ps, and it's quite easy to understand what that is about. Some people think it's 5 Ps because there should be people added to it, but I'm conservative, so I'm sticking with the 4 Ps. But if you were to add 5 Ps, they would mean, the 5th P would mean people, i.e. relationships and the assets that you have within your organization. So I'm not dismissing it, but I think my graphics works better when there's 4. So the most important part of the marketing mix from the outset of when you're a startup is the product. So everybody here, if you work at a startup, you have an idea, and that idea concerns the product. I think it's very important to understand and appreciate that defining certain aspects of the product falls within the realm of marketing. It's not just about advertising, it has other aspects to it. Second part of the marketing mix is price. Obviously, price has, going back to the definition of marketing, very relevant for the profit, for the other, and for how you deal with and relate to the other stakeholders that you deal with. Are you a free product, or are you charging for the product? Are you charging enough to make money of the product? Promotion is the part of the marketing mix which most people associate and think of with marketing. And that's because it's the most visible part. It has to do with advertising, and it has to do with the promotional activities that we otherwise do. And of course, public relations. And then the final part is place or distributions, as it says here. So those are the channels or the avenues that can be used for customer acquisition. That's also an important part, but until you have a product, there's not really too much thought being put into distribution or the place. So not that you don't start thinking about it before your product's finished, but in the context of an early stage startup, you spend a lot of time, 80% of your time, thinking about the product and what it's supposed to look like. So there's one field that I'd like to add to this, which encompasses all of this in terms of its function, and I'd like to mention it because product management at its core is a very, very useful function, and it's an emerging field that I think startups benefit from taking into consideration. So product management is essentially let's say a product manager is essentially CEO of a product, and they deal with all the aspect of the marketing mix. So, when you go back to the 4 Ps, they kind of take one product and shepherd it through the product development process and into the marketplace. And that's exactly what you as a startup do early on. When you take your first product, you try to create something around it. You have to apply the market knowledge that you have and impulses from the market to the product and then shepherd it back out to the marketplace. So I'm mentioning product management because I think if you're thinking about adding somebody with business acumen or marketing competencies to your team as an entrepreneur, a product management type role would probably be the one I would recommend the highest for a startup. So after I did this lecture last year, I had a question from one of the entrepreneurs that attended, and he said, when is the right time to hire somebody with marketing? And I said, you really need to have somebody as part of your team from the get-go, and that should essentially have the product management type responsibilities. All right, so those are some of the sort of frameworks, concepts that at the high level define marketing. I wanted to try to make this practical, so let's see how this would be applied within a startup context. Now, we start off, as I said, with an idea, and some people have moved forward, have conceptualized, maybe have a prototype or a product and are ready to go out, but a lot of people that come to Mars, they haven't even answered any of the questions that I put on the screen in front of you here. So there's no name, they are poor to articulate what the product or the service that they're working on, what it's called, what's the name. So, what kind of problems do they solve? Is that an important problem? Is it urgent? What's the size of the market? So these are sort of key issues. And I think it's important to, when you're an entrepreneur, yes, you should take some time and think about what you do with your life. But at the same time, I think it's to your own benefit also to put a stake in the ground and say, okay, I'm working on this and I'm exploring it. So just writing down the answers to these questions means that you start thinking about, okay, what's the next step? How can I conceptualize this and how can it make sense in the marketplace? You wouldn't be able to answer all of these questions offhand. And that's partly why Mars exists. You make a guess, you make assumptions about where you're missing information, and you come to Mars and say, I think this is what it's like. At Mars, we have a market intelligence team. There are 6 people that are specialized by industry, and testing assumptions for entrepreneurs is part of what we do here. So you can come here, if you have a good idea, if you have questions, the market intelligence team is typically how you do that. But independent of Mars, market research, the role of market research in a startup is essentially to test your assumptions. And you can do that all on your own by talking to customers, by engaging with people that know a lot about the marketplace. Right, do we have anybody in the audience called Bernard? Anyone? Okay. So I think that's a good thing. So we have a case today. So dehydrated water is a real breakthrough product, and we're going to sort of look at what would be somebody who's conceptualized their idea, have a prototype here. Essentially, what's the next step? You know, how do you prioritize all the different tasks that are facing an entrepreneur? And if you're at sort of a very conceptual level, the first thing that you have to do is to look at validating anything that you put into your assumption about this concept. So an idea is not a product, and it is not a value proposition. So we have to move it from a stage of where you think this is interesting, and it might be interesting, but not as a business, not as something that people actually want to pay money on. It could be a good hobby for you to have, but for it to be a business, you have to have a solid value proposition. This is the number one stumbling block for the entrepreneurs that come into Mars here, is that the value proposition is very vague. So I don't want to sort of talk beyond you here, so let's just define what a value proposition is. It's essentially a statement of the unique benefits delivered by offering to the target customer. So 3 things immediately here: unique, benefits, and target customer. It has to have those 3 aspects of it, otherwise we're missing something. And the reason why we're missing something is that in addition to being a statement, the value proposition is something that reflects the choices that you've actually done in real life. When you develop your product, when you talk to your customers, and when you're defining all the other parts of your marketing mix. So first part, we need a target customer. And I like this kind of wanted type imagery around the target customer. It's easy to identify one particular customer, maybe as your ideal customer. And the reason why you do it that way, rather than talking about market segments at this potential stage, is that new companies, especially those with very innovative or radical ideas, what we call disruptive, essentially don't have a category to fall into. So it's very hard to say what is exactly the market segment you're after. But you can start to thinking about a target customer, somebody who you know would benefit from your product, your idea, what we conceptualize, the can of water, whatever, or dehydrated water. So, obviously Flickr is very kind. It offers Frank Sinatra in a very compromising situation. So I couldn't resist. So anyway, the customers are fickle. At this point, I wanted to just ask a show of hands here. How many in the audience here likes chocolate? That's a good number. More than half, I would say. Now, how many in the audience here likes brown cheese? Like in Ski Queen. Sort of a little red brick that you pick up, and it costs a ridiculous amount of money because it's been flown here from Norway. So 2. I saw 2, so that 3. Okay, excellent. Not as many, but we're still out there. So I like it. It's an acquired taste, of course, but it's what my mother used to put on my school lunches when I was a kid. So, but it just goes to show some products have a bigger market and other products don't have such a big market. And the technology adoption lifecycle, while it doesn't illustrate that particular aspect of it, what it does is that it shows that some customers tend to jump on new products, new technologies, much earlier than others. And the reasons why they do aren't rational. They can't be explained. Because in some areas, I could be considered a technology enthusiast or a visionary, whatever. And in other areas, I'm clearly a laggard, and I'm comfortable with it. There's no status attached to falling into one of these categories. But for marketers of technology products, that's inherently important to understand. So picking a target customer you need to think of what stage of the market how mature the market you're entering is. So, because if you're entering at a very early stage, you're talking to a very specific set of customers, a specific set in the sense that they would buy a product raw. They're very accepting of things that are maybe not completely thought out or completely done. So instead of you sitting there and adding a lot of functionality and fancy colors and what have you, there are people out there that might love to just get their hands on it right from the get-go. But if you're entering a more mature market like the niche markets or where we have pragmatists, they want it streamlined. They want no pain, they want convenience, and you have to make sense for them, and they're a hard sell because they're skeptics to begin with. So the way you talk with them and the way you engage with them is very different depending on how mature your market is. And just a little bit about the chasm that I put in there as well. This is a gentleman called Geoffrey Moore defined this chasm. I think it was in '91 he came out with a book called Crossing the Chasm. So it's in my opinion, a monumental book for all technology marketers. It essentially explains why some technology markets develop much quicker than others. And it's very important for us to understand that, okay, in that particular phase, a lot of things have to change. So in order to cross the chasm, make it from the early market and over to the more pragmatic market, your positioning has to change, so everything around your marketing communication has to change. Your product, your partnering, your distribution, everything has to change. So, what worked for you before suddenly doesn't work anymore, and you have to get new partners and all that. So that's what business development is about, is to manage those shifts, find your new partners, and your marketing has to sort of follow that because your offering changes along with the rest of your messaging. So a key part of the value proposition is that it has to solve a problem for whatever target customer you decide to define. And Clayton Christensen defines this in terms of very well because he talks about job to be done. So essentially the idea is that everybody, when they wake up in the morning, they have certain things they'd like to achieve in the day. Work life, socially, it doesn't matter. They're going about their business, and they think they have a good idea of how to do what they want to, or their objectives, essentially. And I like that description because it is essentially, we'll take questions afterwards. It's essentially forcing us to think from a customer perspective and think in their everyday life. So the job to be done idea is essentially that, okay, what kind of problems can you spot when somebody's going about their daily business, whether it's in their job situation or as consumers? Are there anything that in your product that can help them make life easier? And one of the things that Clayton Christensen says is that if you're launching a product that has nothing to do with somebody's daily life, that it doesn't help them achieve what they're setting out or waking up to do that day, you have a problem because people don't change that much. What they want to do in their lives is inherently quite stable. So either it fits within that life or it doesn't. And that's a key aspect of the role of marketing here, is to investigate and figure out, okay, exactly what kind of problems are people encountering as they're going about their daily lives and trying to achieve their objectives. With technology products, we have an additional issue, which is that we didn't exist a short while ago. So how could people know about us? I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? So the fact that you can do things and go about your daily life in a better way today than you could yesterday, well, that's good news. But until people actually know that that's possible, well, they don't know that they have a problem. So it's important to think about that. You can't actually go out in the street and say, you're interested, is this a problem for you? And they'll say, no, it isn't, I think I'm just fine. But if you then educate them and say, well, did you know it was possible to do A, B, and C? Then they say, oh, really? I've been going about it in the D, E, and F way. So maybe I should consider that. At least the early adopters would respond that way. So the framing a customer problem, understanding that it's a real problem, potentially one with economic consequences attached to it, that's a key aspect of reaching a good value proposition. So then we now have a target customer, so we know who we're thinking of working or targeting, and we know the problem we're trying to solve. Now, essentially, what we have to do is to craft a product that could solve that problem for them. So, and again, I'm going to go back to the sort of Geoffrey Moore thinking here. So he defines the term whole product. And the whole product is the product that isn't just the core of what you're offering, but it's any services that is required for the customer to get the maximum benefit of what you do. So if that means training, if it means documentation, if it means particular channels that allow him the convenience to buy it or to use your product whenever they need, that's should be part of your whole product thinking. And the reason why is that even though you as a startup may not be able to do all of those things, is that it gives you a guideline for, okay, if that's what the customer actually needs, I need to think about getting partners that can fulfill some of those roles for me. So it goes directly into your partnering strategy. The partner you recruit on the basis of the things that you can't or don't have the capacity or the time to do yourself right now. Now, a key guideline, it's easy at this point in time to overspec a product. Overspeccing a product essentially means wasting money and wasting time. So we have another gentleman who's written extensively about this called Stephen Gary Blank, and he talks about MVP as, what's the minimum viable product we can put out there? And he's a big, big advocate of this, and I like that he's very militant about it as well. There's this one on his blog post quite recently. He posted this story where he and one of his colleagues, they'd been to a meeting with a potential customer. Hadn't gone too well, and they were discussing in the car afterwards. There's a piece we're missing here, and I got the vibe that unless we can solve that specific aspect of the customer problem, he's not going to be a customer with us. So the two of them called their CTO, who was back at the office, and said, can we solve this? How long is it going to take? Is it easy? And essentially the CTO said, yeah, it'll take us a couple of weeks, but it's definitely solvable. And then, so they hung up, and then they said, okay, our product spec at this point is 5 slides. Which of the 5 slides are we taking out and replacing with this? So in other words, he's saying, if we're changing anything, we're still keeping it short. We're still not over-investing in this. So this is a very tough way of prioritizing. It's not going beyond 5 pages or 5 slides for the product spec. And a lot of people go in the trap of over-investing in the product, but it's better to find out what's the minimum you can get away with, right? Venture capital is very hard to come by. For a lot of people, the only option is bootstrapping. So bootstrapping is all about cash flow and cash management. The sooner you can have a product you put out in the marketplace and start getting cash, the better it is. So minimal viable product, I think it's a really good guideline to have as you're talking about what is the first product I'm putting out in the market going to look like. All right, so then we talked about the key issues that make up a value proposition. It's a target customer, has a problem, and we've specified a product that is a solution to that problem. There was one aspect when we put up the definition of the value proposition that we haven't talked about, so I'm going to address that right now. And that's the concept of uniqueness. So obviously, if you have something that in your product is patented, you're inherently unique, but there's still a long way to go before you can achieve uniqueness in the marketplace. So Uniqueness has to do with how you deal with competition. And the uniqueness that I'm putting up here essentially addresses three different aspects of the competitive forces you're facing as an entrepreneur. So the first type of competition is called economic competition. So this is essentially where you don't have anybody who does exactly what you do, but they're competing for the same budget that you would be getting into. So if they're choosing to spend their budget on somebody else's product, even though it doesn't do the same thing as you, you've lost. So that's economic competition. Reference competition is more your direct competition. Those are the people that are out there and solving the same type of problems that you're solving. And it's in that situation you need to differentiate. Yeah, sorry, I skipped the point there about how you compete with economic competition. So it's called domain leadership. It's a positioning strategy. It's very attached to how you go about your marketing communication. Essentially, what domain leadership means is that whatever stage of the market you're in, you try to be seen as either the one with the most innovative technology, the gold standard type product, the market leader, or the best for business. So there are definitely nuances to that, but that's a quick way of looking at what domain leadership is. So in a more early market, the innovative product is what attracts the technology enthusiasts and visionaries. So that's what you want to be, where you want to be seen. Now, differentiation is a more sort of a straightforward marketing differentiation strategy, and I'll go and look at that in a minute here. But I just want to talk about inertia. So as startups, it's very important to keep in mind that whenever you pitch your product, you're going to get no the vast majority of the time. And the reason why you're going to get no is not because people don't like you. It has nothing to do with that. People are in their jobs, quite comfortable most of the time, and they don't like change. And as a startup, you're asking them for a lot. You're asking them to first of all, change the way they do things. And secondly, you're asking them to spend money with somebody who's really just fresh, coming out in the marketplace, looks like a lot of risk. So that's going to be, it's a long proposition. So going back to what we talked about, the bell-shaped curve with a chasm and that whole thing, the early adopters, depending on the market you're operating in, may make up 5%, maybe up to 15% of the overall market. So if it's 5%, you're going to get no 95 out of 100 times that you approach a customer, unless you find a way of identifying the early adopters first. But just understand it doesn't mean anything. And in fact, I kind of think of it as a good thing to get no a lot, because it just means that somebody didn't have this idea, it's completely new to them, and it's validation that you're innovative. Now, it does mean something for your pitch, of course, and eventually you need to make them spend, but it's not inherently a bad thing. Now, the way you deal with inertia, of course, is by competing through, I call it FUD. So essentially, you try to create urgency on the part of the customer. So you say, okay, what's the consequence of not using us? So understanding the cost of not being a customer and being able to communicate that might create some urgency or fear, uncertainty, or doubt on the part of the customer. And that's what you want. That creates urgency. So anyway, in terms of differentiation, another tool set that we use a lot of here at Mars is called the Blue Ocean Strategy book. And one of my favorite tools there is the strategy canvas. So this is one of the examples from that book. Now, the strategy canvas is primarily it's a diagnostic. So essentially, you can plot yourself in there and your key competitors. You see how you score on sort of key customer value criteria, and you'll understand your competitive profile from that perspective. The interesting thing about, and why I choose to put this particular example up here, is that Southwest Airlines, I'm sure some of you are familiar with them, they're a low-cost airline, they're based out of the Southwest. They've included in their strategy canvas car transportation. In other words, they didn't necessarily say, okay, we're in the airline business. They said, we're in the transportation business, and we'd like to see how we can best move people from A to B and attract the most number of customers. So they thought, okay, well, a lot of people choose driving. Is there a way that we can persuade them to not drive? I mean, think about it. The flag carriers have loyalty programs, expensive loyalty programs, and that guides a lot of customer choice when it comes to the airline traffic. So it's a really tough marketplace to come into when you have those kind of loyalties built up there already. So how can you tap into a market segment that doesn't have those kind of loyalties? Well, the people that drive. They're not flyers at this point in time, but you want to convert them. So by putting this, the car transportation into this particular canvas, you can see, okay, where are the key benefits that we can articulate to those who are car drivers as our value proposition. So the strategy canvas, very good tool, and it's quite accessible, I feel. So I just want to put that out there as an example of how you can create a differentiated profile for yourself. All right, so we started out with a can of something, and we've now analyzed, we listened, and we tweaked and refined our idea by going through this analytical process. And a lot of you said you like chocolate, so here you go. That's what happens when you do research. You start with something, you listen to the market, you develop it, then you end up launching something completely different. Now, and it happened with me. I started my company, Clear Sky Advisors, a little over a year ago now. I thought I was going to do one specific thing, and I pitched it, and I was out in the marketplace, and I talked to people probably for about 4 or 5 months, and ended up being in business, and I haven't done a thing of what I thought I would do when I set out, and I've done completely different things. So this real life just happening for you. So the thing that Stephen Gary Blank talks about in his book, 4 Steps to Epiphany, is that you have to do the initial stages, essentially the going from idea, validation to value proposition. He uses slightly different words. He uses customer development is the way he describes it. But in the context he presents it is really quite important for a lot of entrepreneurs. What he's saying is that until you have validation from the marketplace, you should not scale, because you have no idea what you're scaling. Now, running a technology business is all about scale. But essentially what he's saying is here, you got to have stomach to wait. Be patient, listen to your customers, be out there, pitch, get feedback, refine your value proposition, and then when you feel you have something that's ready for the marketplace, then you build your business model. So we like, at Mars, we use the Osterwalder framework. It's another very visual, it's an easy to use tool. It can easily be shared with a team when you want to craft your business model. But essentially, in addition to value proposition, crafting a viable business model is the well, I said value proposition is the #1 problem. So this is the #2 problem that entrepreneurs that come to Mars have. So a viable business model is essentially one that is slightly heavier on the right-hand side than it is on the left-hand side. In other words, it generates more customers and revenue streams than it generates cost. So crafting a business model is about putting together the business logic. How do you make money? And this chart is excellent for that. And you notice that right smack in the middle of that business model is the value proposition. So you've done key parts of the chart already, but when you start building the business model, unless you have a clear value proposition, all the other things that are coming in place, need to be in place there, are not going to fall in place that easily. The other thing I wanted to say about the business model canvas is that thinking back to the definition of marketing and the marketing mix, you'll see that a few of the other things that were part of the marketing mix are popping back up here. So the channels, or the distribution, the relationships, the customer segments, and even your partners, those are key aspects. Revenue streams, pricing, those are key aspects of the marketing mix that comes back into the business model canvas here. There is going to be a separate lecture on business model in about a month's time, maybe not even that long, so I recommend you all to come back to listen to that. It's a professor from U of T. What's his name again? AJ Agrawal? Yeah, so we're very excited to have him. So do you know the date? No, November sometime. But anyway, business model, absolutely must for anybody who's in the business of starting up. So I've just gone through some of the key decisions that you make in the business model. They are derived from the decisions that you make on your value proposition. Anyway, so we've got about 10 minutes left, and I thought what I do from now on is cover the other aspects of marketing that are going to be in the other lectures. So the first thing I wanted to do is just, it was mentioned earlier, the Entrepreneur's Toolkit. This is where we have a lot of material. It's an online, it's a wiki. You can go in, it's open, it's searchable, and we've done it that way because we don't expect people to go in and read long pieces, but if you want vocabulary, if you want to understand a particular concept, you'll find an article that is 500 to maybe up to 1,000 words. We try to keep it quite brief and very accessible there. So this is the URL. It's easy to find off the front page of the Mars website. And then we have a bunch of workbooks. So this is where we add some process for you. And we have marketing strategy workbooks. They cover the analytical foundation, critical value factors, which is what we've talked mostly about today, and the strategic marketing approach. We'll have two more that it's in final editing right now. One is marketing communication for startups, and steps in creating revenue forecast, including sales forecast. Will hit the website within the next few weeks. All right, so other lectures that are coming up on December 8th. We're going to go back to the value proposition and cover it more in depth. So April Dunford is doing that lecture. Oh, sorry, not April Dunford, it's Joe Wilson. So it's one of the other Mars advisors that are going to do that. Still, the date is the same. Market analysis is going to be covered by Usha Srinivasan. She's our Director of Marketing Intelligence. That's on January 12th. And I've already mentioned a little bit today about the role of market research as part of the process of finding out your value proposition. And she's going to talk about both frameworks for analyzing the market as well as the market research techniques that are relevant for startups. And I think there's going to be some interesting things there. Marketing communications, I don't think we have a speaker for that yet. February 23rd, going to define the field of Marcom and look at the marketing communication tools that are relevant for tech startups, and especially whatever is low budget. And one specific thing we're going to address is the issue of thought leadership, which is critical for all startups. It's how you create essentially a lot of free publicity for yourself. Sales and business development is going to be led by Krista Jones. She's the practice lead for our ICE practice here. That's on March 9th. And one of the interesting things about Krista's lecture is that she's going to talk about how you sell value. The specific aspect of technology products, when you pitch it to a customer, there's a big sort of gap. So, one of my colleagues at one point, he called it the Grand Canyon between you and your customer. And essentially, the person that you're pitching it to will never know as much about your product as you do. There's always going to be that difference in terms of understanding the complexity of your product and how it works, and you have to respect that. So when you're selling value, you're talking in terms that the customer understands. So I think it's a key aspect. As entrepreneurs, we tend to talk a lot about the features and the capabilities of our product and our organization. Selling value is to talk about what it means for the customer. So I like that approach to selling. Distribution is another key lecture. Comes up the following week, March 16th. We don't have a speaker for that? Okay, Mark Zimmerman, one of our other advisors in the IC practice, and he's going to talk about both how the criteria developed for choosing and manage distribution channels, and as well as some pros and cons with the channels in terms of their cost, flexibility, and other key aspects for startups. And the final marketing lecture is the go-to-market strategy. It's going to be done by Peter Evans, and this is where sort of everything becomes integrated, where we roll it up, and this is more sort of, it's a natural endpoint in terms of our marketing lectures, because it's about how you prepare going to market, presuming that you've covered all the other aspects of marketing that we've looked at in this lecture series. So it's going to be a very entertaining lecture, I'm sure. So that's it for today. Thank you.